this afternoon's program with you. So like all of you in this room, I imagine, Israel is never far from your heart or thoughts, especially at a time like this. So before we begin our program, I wanted to share something. Actually, it was something that was sent to my husband, Mark, and I thought it was so powerful, I wanted to share it with all of you. The deputy commander of the Givati Brigade, which is the main combat unit in the Gaza area, was crying and begging when he conveyed that we're not awake enough to the war situation in Gaza. The fighting, he said, is very difficult and dangerous, and it's a terrible situation where precious Israeli soldiers are being killed each and every night. He emphasized that the main fighting starts at night around 11 o'clock in Israel, which is about 5 p.m. here in the East Coast. And he said it continues until the early morning, and the hardest time being between 2 and 5 a.m. He brings his soldiers further and deeper into Gaza to fight. You can imagine, and you know how dangerous that is. And he emphasized that he and his soldiers need all of Am Yisrael to support them through their prayers, especially at these perilous times. So I wanted to share this with you because I was thinking about the evening hours. And I thought, if all of us were a little bit more cognizant of what's happening in Israel, in Gaza, in the evening hours, we could create this energy and this kavanah and this love and support that I hoped would in some way help the IDF continue the battle and succeed in the battle of eradicating the terrorists and fighting for the safety and the security of our homeland. So with that in mind, what I wanted to do is just say the prayer for the IDF. I thought I would invite you, if you're able to please rise, and then we could continue with HaTikva. Mishaberach Avotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov v'imotenu Sarah Rivka Rachel v'Leah, hu yivarech et chaylei tzva hagana liYisrael v'anshei habitachon, ha'omdim al mishmar artzenu b'yabasha v'avir u'b'yam. Yiten Adonai et oivenu hakamim aleinu nifkaim lifnehem. HaKadosh Baruch Hu yishmor v'yatzil et chayaleinu mikol tzara u'tzaka u'mikol nega u'machala. V'yishlach bracha v'atzlacha b'chol maseidehem. V'yakum bahem hakatuv ki Adonai Elohechem haolech imachem l'hilachem lachem im oivechem l'hoshia etchem v'nomar. Amen. May God who blessed our ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless the soldiers of the armed forces and security forces of the Army of Israel, who on the ground, in the air, and at sea protect the land. May God grant that they defeat the enemies who rise up against us. May God protect our soldiers from all harm and danger, from all injury and illness. And may God afford blessings and success to all their missions. Regarding them, may the words of the Torah prove true. For Adonai, your God, who goes before you, shall join you to battle your foes and aid you to be victorious. And we can say, Amen. Please be seated. So welcome to Temple Beth. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I want to just thank our sponsors for this afternoon's program, Ann and Herb Berezin, Susan and Bill Firestone, Alan Goodman and Joan Goodman, Jeremy and Ann Pava, Joe and Nancy Sklar, and the Jewish Endowment Foundation of Western Massachusetts. And most important, I really want to thank Daniel Goodman for writing this book and for saying, for writing the book, yes, but also for saying, I want to celebrate this moment back home. And I want to just name that there's something very special to me, that this is home for Daniel in a certain way. And it says a lot about the home he was raised in and the community he was raised in, that this significant moment of publishing a book like Soloveitchik's Children, he said, where else would I want to start this journey but back where it all began? And for me, like Daniel, that is the most beautiful thing. And today I was thinking, when I was in Hebrew school with the children, I thought, please God, there should be another generation of people who are as deeply committed to their Yiddishkeit and to the community, and that I feel anchored in the tradition and anchored and loved and held by a community. And I just want to lift that up for all of you to see there was something very special here when Daniel was growing up, because that's really why he's back. It's because of his parents, but it's not just its parents. It's about what you all had and what we continue to work very hard to ensure that children experience in the future. So thank you, Daniel, for honoring us in this really important way. Daniel is a writer, a rabbi, and a scholar, and he has a PhD from JTS. He was ordained from Yeshiva Chovevei Torah. He studied English and comparative literature at Columbia University, and he teaches Jewish thought and theology at St. John's University. He's a former contributor to the Books and Arts section of the Weekly Standard and a current Washington Examiner contributing writer. He published Somewhere Over the Rainbow, Wonder and Religion in American Cinema, and the novel A Single Life. This year he's serving as a postdoctoral fellow at Harvard Divinity School. And Soloveitchik's Children is, we're here celebrating the publication of this book and this work. And with Rabbi Dr. Goodman is Rabbi Dr. David Ellenson, one of the greatest scholars of our time. David is the Chancellor Emeritus of Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion. He's written extensively on the origins and development of Orthodox Judaism in Germany in the 19th century. And Rabbi Ellenson's depth of knowledge and his ability to transmit that information to his students is astoundingly impressive. His Torah is accessible and meaningful and extraordinary, and he's really considered one of the finest teachers of our time. So I'm just thrilled to have Rabbi Ellenson, Rabbi Goodman here to share and to talk about the book. And as you do, I want to highlight two things. First, when we picked this date, we didn't really realize that it was the third Yortzeit of Jonathan Sacks, right? But it was just this past Shabbat, and here it is. It's hard to think that it's 3 years ago. And one of the things that I love about Rabbi Sacks is that when I read what he writes, it seems so obvious, but I never would have thought of it. And he puts things together, and it seems, yeah, sure, I couldn't do it, but when he does it, it looks obvious. And I want to say, as I thought about Soloveitchik's Children, that was the experience I had in the following sense. Soloveitchik's Children are about three of his disciples, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, Rabbi Irving Greenberg, and Rabbi David Hartman. So in my mind, all my life, they've been the Gedolei Hador and the teachers of a generation. And I actually never stopped to think about them as students. And as soon as I looked through the book, I thought, oh, yeah, sure. Rabbi Sacks wasn't always Rabbi Sacks. He grew into being Rabbi Sacks, and the same for Rabbi Greenberg or Rabbi Hartman. And I thought, and the truth is, whereas I had studied each of them individually, I never actually put them together to think about what's similar, what's different. And so what I see from the book is that it's going to help me think and expand my understanding and appreciation of these three great minds. And I'm very excited to read the book, and I'm really excited for this conversation. So with that in mind, I'll thank you in welcoming Rabbi Dr. Goodman and Rabbi Dr. Ellenson.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Can people hear? As long as it's close to my mouth, okay. Anyway, it really is wonderful to be here today, to see Rabbi Katz, Rabbi Wolk, Rabbi Masters, Marcia Shapiro, Joan Goodman. There are a lot of people here that I know from different walks in my own life, so I'm really very, very happy to be here with all of you today, but I'm especially happy to be here with Daniel on this occasion. I want to begin by just making an observation, which I think Daniel knows, and I think his mother knows. I've told him this. I was actually the reader of this book for Alabama Press, so I was one of the readers who enthusiastically endorsed this very, very important book that we are about to discuss in a few moments. I may have said to his mother, they're either going to publish the book or canonize Daniel. I don't know which they'll select to do, but it will be one or the other, because this really is a highly, highly significant and original book that captures the importance of arguably the three most significant modern Orthodox thinkers in our time. And as Rabbi Wolk said a moment ago, no one has really done this, putting all of these thinkers together in the way that Rabbi Goodman has. I want to start, though, Daniel, with the following question, because a few people asked me this. Who was Rabbi Soloveitchik that we're talking about his children? In other words, many people know the name, but what made Rabbi Soloveitchik so significant?
Yeah, great question. And first of all, thank you so much, Rabbi Ellenson, for being here, and for all of you, for Rabbi Amy for organizing this event, and for the sponsors. It's so great to see everyone. As far as Rabbi Soloveitchik is concerned, who was Rabbi Soloveitchik? Who is Rabbi Soloveitchik is another question, because his legacy continues to be disputed among his disciples and students. But just to give a brief overview of who Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik was, he is probably universally regarded as the current thought leader of modern Orthodox Judaism in America, and maybe throughout the world as well. He taught at Yeshiva University, my alma mater, my college, from 1941 to 1985, when he had to step down for health reasons, and he passed away in 1993. He was the Zion, S-C-I-O-N, the descendant of a dynasty of highly trained Talmudic scholars of the Brisk dynasty. His father, Rabbi Moshe Soloveitchik, who was also one of the head rabbis at Yeshiva University, and his grandfather was Rabbi Chaim Soloveitchik, who pioneered the Brisk method of Talmud study, this very highly intellectual form of Torah study. So Rabbi Soloveitchik was a child prodigy in Talmud. He was highly encouraged to pursue that by his father's side of the family, but he also developed an interest in secular learning. He grew up, I should mention, in Eastern Europe, in the early 1900s, and his mother's side encouraged him to pursue secular studies, mathematics, and especially philosophy. And he went and, in different approach to many of the yeshiva-trained scholars of the day, he went to get a PhD at a secular university, and he made it to America before the outbreak of the Holocaust, and he uniquely combined secular studies, especially philosophy, with Talmud and Jewish thought in this really original idiosyncratic synthesis. So he is both regarded today as one of the greatest Talmud scholars of the past few generations, and one of the greatest Jewish philosophers, especially in Orthodox Judaism. And he has disciples and students who drew on and continue to draw on both sides of his thought. He ordained thousands of rabbis during his time at YU. So many of the modern Orthodox rabbis who are of that generation in shuls across America and abroad were students who were ordained by Rabbi Soloveitchik. And he's also one of those unique figures in Jewish life who is so highly regarded and continues to be so studied that the meanings of his teachings continue to be debated and argued over. They're like the great medieval Jewish scholar Moses Maimonides. There are different schools of thought about how to interpret Maimonides. Was he more of a philosopher, or was he more of a Torah and Jewish law scholar? So there's this line people say, well, there's your Maimonides and my Maimonides. And you could say very much the same about Rabbi Soloveitchik. So that's a little bit in brief of who he was. There's tons of literature out there about him. And my approach in this book was to focus on three of his most significant students in Jewish thought and Jewish theology who have a particular approach in interpreting his thought and legacy.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I just to re-emphasize some of the points that Rabbi Goodman just made. When the Soloveitchik family came to the United States, as Rabbi Goodman mentioned, his father, Moshe, became the Rosh Yeshiva at the Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary. That was incredibly crucial because within the Orthodox world, there is what sociologists and historians call traditional orthodoxy, which for the most part means individuals who do not affirm the worth of Western culture, and then modern Orthodox Jews who do affirm the worth of Western culture. As Rabbi Goodman indicated, Rabbi Soloveitchik embodied both of these schools, but because this brisker method of Talmud study became so world famous by bringing Moses Soloveitchik to the United States, Rabbi Bernard Revel, who was head of Yeshiva University, was able to bring a degree of legitimacy to modern Orthodoxy. After all, the slogan of Yeshiva University is Torah Umadah, Torah and secular studies, or to quote a phrase used by Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, the great ideologue of modern Orthodoxy in the 19th century, Yafeh Talmud Torah im derech eretz. It's a wonderful thing to combine the study of Torah with secular learning. And Rabbi Soloveitchik embodied that. And then when Moses Soloveitchik passed away, as Rabbi Goodman indicated, Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik became the head of YU, but they brought a great degree of ascribed and earned status to Yeshiva University. They made Yeshiva University fully kosher, as it were, in the Orthodox world. So that's who Soloveitchik was in some measure. What you have done, Daniel, how did you select these three people, all of whom are paragons of modern Orthodox thought, and you might say a word about each one of them, Rabbi Sachs, Rabbi Greenberg, and Rabbi Hartman, and then depending on how you answer it, I'll have a follow-up question.
All right, sure. So
this is sort of like his doctoral exam.
Yeah.
So, but he's passed already with highest honors.
Yes, the follow-up to the dissertation defense. This time you won't put me in a room and I'll have to wait 15 minutes for the verdict, you know. Pass or not pass. So let's begin with the first one then, in terms of how I selected the figures of the book. Rabbi Irving Greenberg, or Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, as he's commonly known, that's where this all really started, because I'm a student of Rabbi Yitz Greenberg's. He was my mentor in Jewish thought and theology during my rabbinic studies at Yeshivat Chovevei Torah in New York. And I grew really close to him and really took to his unique approach to Jewish theology. And I was fascinated during my time studying with him during his classes. I was really intrigued with how often when he would discuss an idea that was very novel, or you might even say radical in the Orthodox world, he would cite his teacher, Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik, as a raya, as we say, as a proof for this idea. And this would develop consistently throughout his classes. He would bring up a really profound and almost radical idea and then say, this is from Halachic Command, one of Rabbi Soloveitchik's great works on Jewish thought. Or this idea I'm really drawing from The Lonely Man of Faith, or another of Rabbi Soloveitchik's classic works in Jewish theology. So this stayed with me, and just to allude to what I had mentioned before, I had been to YU, Yeshiva University, for undergrad. And in Yeshiva University, Rabbi Soloveitchik he's still so revered, he's still quoted and cited all the time, but I was under a certain impression of who Rabbi Soloveitchik was and what he taught and what his teachings were supposed to mean. And Rabbi Yitz Greenberg was coming in teaching us some very different but also very fascinating interpretations of his ideas and teachings. And by the time I got to graduate school and wanted to pick a topic for my doctorate, here we go with the dissertation defense again, I had written a research paper while I was in graduate school on the intellectual relationship between Yitz Greenberg, Rabbi Greenberg, and Rabbi Soloveitchik. And I thought, okay, there's so much more there than what I had written in this one paper. Why not explore this further? And my doctoral advisor, Professor Al Middleman, suggested, well, I think this could be a good topic for a doctorate, for a doctoral dissertation, to just explore the relationship between Rabbi Soloveitchik and his student, Rabbi Greenberg. But if you would want to expand it, it could be a potentially great dissertation and maybe a very significant work if you would cover some of his other students. So that's when I thought, well, okay, I know Rabbi David Hartman was one of Rabbi Soloveitchik's most illustrious disciples in Jewish thought. So I selected him. And then the third one is more of an, you wouldn't say completely out of left field choice, but maybe somewhat surprising, because he did not study directly with Rabbi Soloveitchik, and that's Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. The reason I selected Rabbi Sacks is because I also was aware, like with Rabbi Greenberg, how often Yitz Greenberg would cite Rabbi Soloveitchik. Rabbi Sacks would as well. Rabbi Sacks is one of my greatest teachers, even though I never studied under him directly, but I consider myself in many ways a disciple of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks.
And you
and
have
I thought
great
you could
picture
say
with him.
I do in the book, yes. There is a picture of me meeting Rabbi Sacks in the book for the first time. The picture is from Pesach that my family went on, a Pesach trip where he was a scholar in residence, and there are some other people, I think, here today who will, I was just a little bit past my bar mitzvah, so I was maybe 14, I think. Yeah, so just like with Rabbi Sacks, who had only a couple of actual in-person interactions with Rabbi Soloveitchik in his life, but yet they were rather significant for him. And Rabbi Soloveitchik became someone very influential in Rabbi Sacks's own journey towards becoming a scholar in theology. That's what Rabbi Sacks has been for me. So that's how all these three figures came about in this constellation that I selected to orbit around Rabbi Soloveitchik.
So all three of these men are clearly significant figures in their own right. One might say that Rabbi Hartman is perceived as the most radical in some ways, and in many senses, one might even argue, far from a classical traditional Orthodox theology, that Rabbi Greenberg is somewhere in the middle, and Rabbi Sacks probably the closest in some ways, not in others. How might you describe the relationship among these three men, not just in relationship to Rabbi Soloveitchik, but in relationship to one another, and what do you think that says about the breadth of Orthodox thought in the modern world?
Well, they have very complex relationships both with one another and with Rabbi Soloveitchik, which is really what the first chapter of the book is about, exploring these relationships both on a vertical and horizontal level, if you will, meaning their relationships with their teacher, Rabbi Soloveitchik, and with one another. They, in all kinds of ways, drew from Rabbi Soloveitchik's thought in developing their own philosophies and theologies, and that's what chapter 2 of the book goes into in detail. And then chapter 1 presents some of the disagreements that they had with Rabbi Soloveitchik and with one another. You know, they, as much as they were influenced by Rabbi Soloveitchik, they did not see eye to eye with him in many different areas, and even with one another, there were some really significant areas of dispute. And I should just also mention the brief biographies too, just to give a brief overview. Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, may he continue to be alive and well, is the only figure among these three who is still alive and with us. He is currently, he's been in recovery from some health issues, and he's in an advanced age, but thank God, still writing and still teaching. He was born in Brooklyn, and born and raised in Brooklyn. He was ordained from his ordination was from a small yeshiva in Brooklyn, and He was going to college there in New York. Also, he didn't meet Soloveitchik. He didn't meet Rabbi Soloveitchik until later on, around the time when he was getting his doctorate in Harvard in history in the 50s. But when he did, and then he later came to Yeshiva University to be a history professor in that era, and in the 60s, he came more and more into Rabbi Soloveitchik's orbit, very attracted to his thought. He oscillated various times in his life between the pulpit and scholarship in academia, and later went on to found some important centers for Jewish organizational life. Rabbi David Hartman, born in the same era and around the same place, he had quite an eclectic background because he spent time in Lakewood Yeshiva, which, if anyone is familiar, is one of the most yeshivas, let's say, one of the most rigorous places for Talmudic learning in the United States. And he's the only of the three figures who went to Yeshiva University to get his degree, and is one of the only three figures who was actually ordained by Rabbi Soloveitchik. And Rabbi Soloveitchik was the one who told him, because he was very interested in philosophy, he told him to go pursue philosophy as well. And he eventually got his doctorate and followed Rabbi Soloveitchik's path in blending Torah study and secular philosophy. He had a pulpit in Montreal for several years before moving to Israel and founding the Shalom Hartman Institute, which is also one of the more significant institutes for Jewish learning in the world today. And Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, these are all figures of the same era. As Rabbi Walk mentioned, unfortunately passed away in an untimely manner only 3 years ago. Rabbi Sacks is the only one of those figures who is not American. He's actually English, born and bred in the United Kingdom. And he also received a PhD in philosophy and rabbinic ordination as well. And as many of you may know, was chief rabbi of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth, starting in the early 1990s through much of the rest of his life, and has become one of the more influential Jewish thinkers in the world today among all denominations, really. Should we return to the previous question?
So let's talk about some specific areas. Perhaps maybe deal with issues of halakha and perhaps revelation and authority, where clearly someone like Rabbi Sacks differed radically and was quite critical of Rabbi Greenberg, and particularly also Rabbi Greenberg's wife, Blue Greenberg. Their position had been where there's an halachic will, there's an halachic way, strong penchant for feminism, and Rabbi Sacks was really quite critical of this. And in addition, in the areas of revelation, you have a number of Orthodox thinkers who are really quite critical of Hartman, who see his views as too anthropocentric, that is to say, oriented too much towards the human element in the halakhic equation and not affirmative enough of the role that God plays as revealer. So in these two areas, the issues of halakha and revelation, how might you respond to this in terms of how these thinkers differed among themselves and how they both overlapped with and differed from their teacher, Rabbi Soloveitchik?
These are all somewhat complex issues within their
and they're
thought,
dealt with brilliantly in the book.
Yeah. So, yeah, there's a little pitch for the book there if you want to go more in depth into all of these issues. Chapter 1 of the book deals with them. The one concerning Rabbi Sachs and Rabbi Greenberg and his wife Blue is quite an interesting one and challenging one, because they are representing different sides of the same coin, I think, in Jewish thought and Jewish life, but yet fell into this dispute about, to what extent to advocate for certain changes in halakha, in Jewish law. So, as some of you might know, Blue Greenberg, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg's wife, is a significant thinker and writer and scholar in her own right, and is one of the pioneers of feminism in Orthodox Judaism, and has a number of significant books on this and teachings. And she and Rabbi Greenberg have been some of the fiercest advocates for making amendments to Jewish law within the bounds of halakha to make Jewish divorce more amenable to and easier to get for cases where the husband is refusing a Jewish bill of divorce to his wife, and then causing the wife to become what's called an aguna, a chained woman, literally, because according to strict Jewish law, she cannot get remarried without the husband willingly giving a get, willingly giving the writ of divorce. And in Orthodox law, they would interpret the halachot, the laws around when you're able to kind of compel the man to give the get, or they would interpret these very strictly, so that it would be very hard to actually compel one of the recalcitrant men to give such a get. And Rabbi Yitz and Blue, especially Blue here, her quote that Rabbi Ellenson referenced, where there's a halachic will, where there's a rabbinic will, there is a halachic way. They were trying to say there are mechanisms within Jewish law that we can use to help women in this situation, and we're just not using them because we don't have, for whatever reason, our rabbis are not having the will to use these means. And that's where a bit about where that comes from. And Rabbi Sachs responded to that by saying, just because there is a halachic way doesn't mean there will be a rabbinic will. Just because you can do certain things in Judaism or in religion more generally doesn't mean that you should do them. And I believe there is wisdom to both of their approaches. In life in general, I think we understand that not everything that you can do should you do, but also there are times where when people are in need of some solutions that are not being provided by mainstream approaches, you should try to expand and be a little flexible in their approaches. So they had quite a dispute about this, and I was able to interview both Rabbi Yitz and Blue for the book, and I give their responses in the book. But they had quite a back and forth with Rabbi Sachs about this.
And what about the charge against Rabbi Hartman that his views don't reflect sufficiently what one might call a classical or mainstream Orthodox view, that the Torah comes from Sinai and that the commandments, the mitzvot, are quite literally divine commands. I mean, I bring this up because in Rabbi Hartman's work, quite clearly, he talks a great deal about covenant, brit, and the notion that human beings are shutafim, partners with God, and that one of the great elements of classical Jewish teaching is that God, who is omnipotent, divine, transcendent, nevertheless thinks sufficiently, as it were, highly of human beings, that God makes us God's partners in the work of creation, and consequently in the whole halachic process and the process of revelation, human beings are called upon to play a very active role. People like Rabbi Daniel Landis have been extremely critical, and you mentioned this in your book. How would you say that these views of Rabbi Hartman's might be defended from an Orthodox perspective, and in what way did they derive even from the writings of his teacher, Rabbi Soloveitchik?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned earlier, Rabbi Hartman is probably the most quote-unquote radical of these thinkers in the Orthodox world, because of some of these views of his views about halachic change and revelation. Towards the end of his life and career, he really seemed to be walking back the whole notion of commandedness and many of the prescriptions of halakha, of Jewish law in general. But even before that, he had some ideas about how Jewish law does and should work that were very different from mainstream Orthodoxy, and really put him at odds with a lot of centrist Orthodoxy. And some of these ideas I discuss in the book, and one of the most important ones is, as Rabbi Ellenson mentioned, is his belief on what covenant means and how that impacts our relationship to Torah, to Jewish law, and to God. He had particular notions of that. They're also complex and hard to describe on one foot, but one of the interesting ways that he conceptualized it is as a marriage, as a partnership, as Rabbi Ellenson mentioned. And married partners need to be able to change with one another as they grow and respond to one another's needs as their needs and desires develop. And so what a partner wants at one stage of the relationship may not be the same thing that the partner wants at another stage in 10 years and 20 years. So I give an example in my book of, so let's say you know your spouse, when you first get married, your spouse likes to have tea in the morning. So you want to do something nice for your spouse, so every morning you make tea for him or her. But 10, 20 years later, they switch to coffee. And so at that point, it would no longer be such a great thing to keep on making tea for your partner if now they want coffee in the morning. So you need to be able to be responsive and not view everything as fixed in stone. And that was in his Rabbi Hartman's notion of covenant, that yes, we have this relationship with God, and we have certain laws and actions that he commanded us to do, but history changes, we change, and even God might change. And that's a theologically radical notion that Rabbi Yitz Greenberg really develops. But in order to be responsive to changing notions of who we are and what we need at stages of our collective history, halakha, Jewish law, should perhaps be responsive as well. Was there another prompt to that?
I mean, I think just to continue that thought, I mean, in some sense, though I don't think you cite this in your book, but the description that you've just given, there is a book called Law's Empire by Ronald Dworkin, who was a law professor at Harvard. And Dworkin, when he talks about notions of law, says that the law needs to be understood in effect as a chain novel. That is to say that there are previous chapters to the chapter in which you're living at this moment, and that individual judges, when they make decisions, particularly appellate justices, Supreme Court justices, they attempt to show fidelity to the past. They have an obligation to know what's been taught in the past, but simultaneously that doesn't obviate the obligations they have at the present to take these teachings from the past and apply them in novel conditions as people move forward and as a people move forward. And I bring this up because you brought up Rabbi Greenberg, and a large part of your book deals with how these men dealt with the issue of the Holocaust in terms of both the 1940s and then post-Holocaust theology. And Rabbi Greenberg, as you mentioned, certainly looks to the Holocaust as a significant break, caesura, as it were, in Jewish thinking. In what sense would you say that Greenberg both is derivative from Soloveitchik, and in what way is his thought and that of others in relationship to the Holocaust perhaps distinct? Or to phrase it in one last way, in what way is the Holocaust a highly significant event in the thinking of these men?
So this is probably the heart of the book, which is chapter 4, where I present their theological responses to the Shoah, the Holocaust. And as I discuss in that chapter, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg's approach to dealing with the Holocaust from a theological perspective is maybe his most famous work, his most famous series of ideas in Jewish thought. And it also got him in the biggest trouble in mainstream orthodoxy. Nonetheless, I think one of the biggest chidushim insights, if I could say so, from the book is that when I was studying this very carefully, both his thought and Rabbi Soloveitchik's, I came to the conclusion that as radical as Rabbi Greenberg's ideas are about how to respond to the Holocaust and what it means for Jews today, as radical as those might be, it really develops out of Rabbi Soloveitchik's thought. And that's what I was trying to present in the book. So Rabbi Soloveitchik, he had quite a significant response to the devastation of the Shoah, of the Holocaust, that was different in ways that I believe were and still are underappreciated in Jewish thought and in mainstream orthodoxy. Because the traditional Jewish approach to suffering, the question of why bad things happen to good people, why the innocent suffer, which is unfortunately in the past few weeks, I think has been something on a lot of our minds, and in a way their thought is more relevant now today because of how it speaks to this question. One of the more common or the most common traditional Jewish responses to this question, from the Torah through the Talmud into the medieval ages and the early Renaissance thinkers, was, well, if you're suffering, then you must have sinned somehow. It was this sin punishment paradigm. We were exiled from the land because we sinned. This happened because we sinned, and if we repent, then we can improve it. But and this was a response given by many thinkers, even to some of the really great Jewish tragedies throughout history, like the Spanish Inquisition, the massacres of the Crusades, pogroms in Eastern Europe. They were continuing to give this answer up until the Holocaust, post-1945, when Jewish thinkers started to grapple with how to respond to it theologically, consensus seemed to be emerging among many that we cannot give the traditional response anymore. The traditional sin punishment paradigm would just be too odious to people who experienced it, and to the Jewish people and really to the world as a whole, throughout the world witnessed. How can you say that? There were still some, what you might say, far right, or from a religious perspective, thinkers on the very far right of Judaism religiously, Haredi ultra-Orthodox thinkers who continued to provide this answer, but other Jewish thinkers, by and large, just couldn't bring themselves to do so. And Rabbi Soloveitchik was perhaps the first Orthodox thinker to not give the sin punishment paradigm answer to how to explain the suffering of the Holocaust. He addressed it in other manners. He never really addressed it in great detail and in a sustained way. But when he did address it, the fact that he did not say it, or what he did not say, is, I believe, just as significant as what he did say. And because he provided an opening in Orthodox thought to not give that traditional response, the traditional sin paradigm response, he provided that opening in Orthodox thought for thinkers like Yitz Greenberg, Rabbi Greenberg, and the next generation to come along and provide their answers, which dealt with the Holocaust and Jewish thought in a more sustained way, and suffering, and tried to provide some solutions that we could really grasp onto in our day-to-day lives.
I'm going to ask just a couple more questions. Do we want to have questions from the audience too? Okay, so I'm going to ask two more. One, you also deal with issues of interfaith dialogue. Clearly, Rabbi Soloveitchik wrote a very, very famous essay in the 60s called Confrontation. And in it, actually, Rabbi Soloveitchik argued that there could not be interreligious dialogue in a public sense between Jews and non-Jews, that questions of religious faith were, in effect, axiomatic and were hermetically sealed off from other traditions. And he permitted dialogue only on political and social, but not theological issues. Yet all three of his disciples, Rabbi Hartman, Rabbi Greenberg, and Rabbi Sachs, were major practitioners of interreligious dialogue. So might you say a few words about that?
Sure. There's also an entire chapter on this in the book for any of you wanting to go into it in greater detail. And this is actually the subject of the paper that I wrote at JTS in my doctoral program, out of which grew my desire to do the whole book, the dissertation that became the book on this subject, because the paper that I wrote was on how and why Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, my teacher, broke from his teacher on the subject of interfaith dialogue. Rabbi Yitz Greenberg was one of the pioneers of interfaith dialogue in Orthodox Judaism, and dialogue on a theological level, which is something that his teacher, Rabbi Soloveitchik, explicitly prohibited. So the question is, how was he able to do that when his teacher said no and he wanted to? And how were Rabbi Hartman and Rabbi Sachs able to do so as well when Rabbi Soloveitchik was such a significant figure in their lives? And I argue in the book that just as Rabbi Greenberg's post-Holocaust theology, even though it is quite different than Rabbi Soloveitchik's, but it's an outgrowth of Rabbi Soloveitchik's own response to the Holocaust, you can make the same argument I discuss in terms of their approaches to interfaith dialogue, they all seem to sense, Rabbi Greenberg, Hartman, and Sachs, their generation, that this is something we really have to do. We've been neglecting this for various reasons in our history. We haven't really been able to do it historically, especially if you study the relationship between Judaism and Christianity in history. For 1800, almost 2,000 years, it was so fraught. But finally, there's an opening to have dialogue with Christians. And Rabbi Greenberg came to his teacher, Rabbi Soloveitchik, and said, Rebbe, you know, from your teachings, I get the impression that this should be permitted and we should do this. And why can't we do it? You wrote in your article, in your address, that we cannot. And Rabbi Soloveitchik responded to him, and I interviewed Rabbi Greenberg about this, and I present some of his responses here. This exchange, and according to what Rabbi Greenberg told me, Rabbi Soloveitchik told him that you really can, you know, I give you permission to, but I can't say that publicly. And Rabbi Greenberg said, well, you know, I really wish you would say this publicly, but he didn't want to press him too much. There were just certain things that Rabbi Soloveitchik, as Rabbi Greenberg said, was a gadol, meaning one of the greatest Torah scholars, Torah giants of his generation, but he was a smart and especially politically astute gadol. He played politics as well as he played Torah and Talmudic scholarship, and he knew that there would be some in his community who wouldn't be ready for some of his approaches, and something was really permitted, and he permitted it. Some of his community might not be ready to accept that permission, but he gave permission privately, according to Rabbi Greenberg, to do it, and Rabbi Greenberg went ahead, and much of the relationship that we have today, at least in Orthodox Judaism and Christianity, is really much of a credit to Rabbi Greenberg's. And we continue this work today, not just in the relationship between Judaism and Christianity, but between Judaism and all faiths, the imperative that I believe we have to continue building on the work of my teacher, Rabbi Greenberg, in this area, and continue to forge relationships with peoples of all faiths, I think is really a credit to the work that they did, and Rabbi Sachs and Hartman, who were pioneers in this area as well.
So I'm going to just ask one last question. How much time would we have for questions? Okay, and then I'm going to make a couple of comments in conclusion. But you end the book, I mean, the conclusion is really fascinating, and I do have to say, radically different than the original text I saw. I mean, you clearly thought about a lot of issues, but one point you make is that the Torah, you know, is often called in Greek a Pentateuch, meaning 5 books. And we talk about Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the 5 books of Moses. Scholars have often argued that the Torah was originally, and if any of you are about to take your GREs or SATs, this might be helpful, not only a Pentateuch, but there are people who argue from a scholarly point of view that the Bible was originally a hexateuch, that is to say 6 books, and that it ended originally with the book of Joshua. You don't mention the scholarly part in there, meaning modern biblical scholarship, but Daniel, Rabbi Goodman does make the point that interestingly the Bible ends with the Jewish people not in the land of Israel. The Bible ends not with it culminating in Jewish entry into Eretz Yisrael, but the Bible ends with us being, as it were, al hagvul, on the boundary of entering into Israel. And you place a great deal of emphasis on the fact that there is a Talmudic passage that the first 5 books of the Bible and Esther, which of course also Megillat Esther is outside of the land, those will remain holy even after the Messiah comes. There's a curious midrash on that. And that the Torah itself was given at Sinai, which is to say, not in the land of Israel. And you use that as a metaphor to affirm the import of diasporic Judaism and diasporic theology. And I wondered what you might want to add to that or say in terms of a clarifying point, because all of these thinkers are non-Medinat Yisrael or Eretz Yisrael thinkers, even as Israel plays critical roles in their lives.
Yeah, thank you for the question, because this is, for me, one of the more personal questions and issues of the book, which is, okay, we're in the diaspora and we're learning Jewish thought and trying to perpetuate Jewish theology in America, in the diaspora, and yet we're living in an era where the Jewish people have returned to their homeland in the land of Israel. And so what is the role then? You know, it would be like in the Torah, if the Jewish people had entered at the end of the Torah, and yet there were continuing to have books being written and adding to the Torah of Jewish events taking place still in Egypt or Babylon or outside. There would be something, maybe something wouldn't fit there, something maybe not so harmonious. But yet, you know, we continue living our Jewish lives and engaging in Jewish thought, still in this era, a very significant era in Jewish history, where we might think, okay, now Jewish theology and Jewish thought should have a profoundly Israel-centric focus. And what role is there for us still to play in the development of Jewish thought in our time? And that's why I really was taken by that midrash about how in the times of the Mashiach, the only books that will be preserved as holy will be the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, and the book of Esther. And I was thinking of that in relation to a teaching of Rabbi Sachs that I discuss in that chapter. His whole idea of Judaism being a religion in the future tense, being the religion of the not yet, that other mythological systems look to the past as where their golden age is, but Judaism looks to the future as to where the golden age will be. And the Torah ends on the brink of the Jewish people entering the land of Israel to signify that we are still looking forward to something that's a perpetual Jewish stance. Even the name of God, as Rabbi Sachs has pointed out, is in the future tense, Ehyeh asher ehyeh, which got mistranslated by Greek and then later Latin scholars when God appears to Moses in the burning bush and Moses asks him his name, and God responds. You may know the famous line from the Latin Vulgate that was translated into the King James Bible as I am who I am, which is actually a mistranslation. In the Hebrew, it's I will be who I shall be.
And so Daniel gives you both the Greek and the Latin in the book, so it's terrific.
Well, we have to satisfy our Greek biblical scholars here too. We can't leave them hanging. But you see this continual inclination in Jewish theology towards the future, towards looking forward to something, or even God gives his name to Moses as being in the future tense. And I think in this final chapter is where I start to develop some of my own theology too, as an outgrowth from my teachers, Rabbi Greenberg and his teacher, Rabbi Soloveitchik, that the significance of Jewish thought in the diaspora, this is the subtitle to my book, the significance of Jewish theology in America and around the world, is that a theology that springs from the diaspora and is grounded in these areas is a theology of the future tense. It's a theology of looking forward, whereas a theology that is centered in the land of Israel, a Jewish thought that is rooted there, may be a kind of Jewish thinking that is more settled. Just as when someone is in their home, they're more settled, and when they're out on the road, there's more of an energy, or there can be more of an energy there, a dynamic, an impulse, because when you're on the road, you have to get somewhere. You're not gonna just settle there. Well, you may need to camp out overnight like the Jews in Egypt if you're really on the road somewhere. But the whole point of being out on the road is because you're looking to get to your destination. And I think that energy of looking forward has been part of what has energized Jewish theology in the past couple thousands of years in the diaspora. If you look at some of the greatest works of Jewish thought, they've been written outside the land of Israel. Maimonides, his writings, his philosophy, some of the great works of Hasidic and Jewish mystical thought, Rabbi Soloveitchik's words continuing up to this year with Rabbi Greenberg and Rabbi Sachs, have been written outside of the land of Israel, and even the Torah itself. And I think all of this is to say that we have still a very significant and important role to play in our lives here in Springfield, in Longmeadow, or wherever we may be in America and the world.
Okay, so why don't we take 2 questions? Okay, yes. What you want to hand? I'm going to give this to the rabbi.
Yeah, I'll take it.
Okay. By the way, while Rabbi Walk is doing this, I do want to point out, in terms of the diaspora, the publisher of this book is the University of Alabama Press. One might not think that the University of Alabama would be one of the major publishers of Jewish studies works, and particularly theology like this, but I do want to mention that back, more than 40 years ago, Rabbi Art Green published his book on Nachman of Bratslav with Alabama Press. David Ellenson wrote a book on a rabbi named Osriel Hildesheimer. You get extra points if you spell it on the exam, which he was the founder of the equivalent of Yeshiva University in Germany. Alabama Press is one of the most distinguished presses in the world for the publication of Jewish studies. So Rabbi Goodman stands in a long line of distinguished scholars, with perhaps one exception, in publishing with Alabama.
Rabbi Goodman, I think as you're going around, hopefully selling this book, because I am dying to read it, you will meet people like me that have heard Rabbi Soloveitchik speak, because I taught at Maimonides. And what you have to understand is I was completely secular. I was the biology teacher. And through kindergarten, through grade 6, I was, would have my little ideas of going into each room with science. I don't think I truly understood that I was listening on Sundays occasionally. He would give these shears. I didn't even know what the word meant. But he was wonderful. He spoke in Yiddish, and he had a translator, but he could speak in English. My question to you, and I might have heard this wrong, I've talked to Blue about this a lot. He said, I believe, that ultimately there will be these 36 tzedeks, whatever, I don't know the number. Yes, and that at that point, you will see more and more women coming into the fold as teachers. And I wondered whether or not you, in his writings, is there any indication of that? Because I didn't take notes.
Yeah, very much so. And thank you for the question, and thank you for coming. It's great to have a representative from Maimonides, which is Jewish day school in the Boston area that Rabbi Soloveitchik was instrumental in founding to teach both Jewish and secular studies, which was Rabbi Soloveitchik's, one of his unique missions in life, and named after Maimonides, one of Rabbi Soloveitchik's heroes, who was also groundbreaking in Jewish philosophy in the Middle Ages for doing that. And another way that Rabbi Soloveitchik was groundbreaking in the Orthodox world was precisely for that reason, for his belief in the importance of women's high-level Torah education and even Talmud study for women. And I think one of the reasons that there are so many great scholars in Orthodox Judaism today who are women is in many ways because of Rabbi Soloveitchik's belief in the importance of providing great educations to boys and girls, to women and men in Jewish studies. One of the pictures that I have in the book, in the photo section, is of Rabbi Soloveitchik giving a lecture at Stern College, which is the part of, here it is. This is Rabbi Soloveitchik at Yeshiva University Stern College for Women at New York in 1966. Yeshiva University is, the undergraduate program is comprised of Yeshiva College for men in Washington Heights and Stern College, the undergraduate part for women in Midtown Manhattan. Rabbi Soloveitchik would go there and give shiurim and give lectures, and to this day there is a Talmud study program there for women.
Bruce, did you have your hand up?
Yeah, Daniel, could you go back to the question of the Holocaust again? And could you give us a digest of what it was that your three figures did say about where God was in the Holocaust?
Yeah, sorry? Said what? Yes. Yeah, oh, okay. I thought there was something else added at the end. Yeah, that's really important to mention. So as I was talking about when we were addressing the question of their responses to the Holocaust earlier, Rabbi Soloveitchik himself, I think a lot of the importance of his theological response to the Holocaust is because of what he did not say. He did not give the traditional sin punishment paradigm to explain suffering. But Rabbi Greenberg and then Rabbi Sachs and to a lesser extent Hartman started to articulate actual responses, actual answers, not just not saying things, but saying certain things. With Rabbi Greenberg, he was the first of that group to address the Shoah, to address the Holocaust, and his response was to explain what happened and where God was through what he believes is a progressive withdrawal of God from history that started in the times of the temple, the destruction of the temple, and continued and culminated in the Holocaust, where God withdrew even further from playing an active role in history in order to give human beings more responsibility to stop tragedies like this ourselves from happening. In terms of where actually God was, Rabbi Greenberg's response echoes that of another Hasidic thinker who was in the Shoah, unfortunately. And that response is God was with us there, suffering with us. That's a response that still may not be satisfactory to people, but it is part of Rabbi Greenberg's theological paradigm of how to understand history. And it's a spur, works as a spur within his own thought for how to respond to suffering and tragedy and what we have to do at a human level to stop these things from happening again. Rabbi Hartman did not address the Holocaust in nearly the same sustained way as Rabbi Greenberg did, or either Rabbi Sachs, but he did write about it in some essays, and later on Rabbi Greenberg believed that, or Rabbi Greenberg actually told me that in his opinion, Rabbi Hartman believed that he should have written more about it, that was a failing about that he felt in his works on Jewish theology, he hadn't covered it enough. Rabbi Sachs's approach to how to deal with it is drawn a bit more from Rabbi Soloveitchik's. In my view, he elaborates more on the idea of why the sin punishment paradigm doesn't work. And I explain this more in that chapter 4. But I think that the really significant approach in Orthodox Jewish thought is really Rabbi Greenberg's approach. And then joined to that is his conclusion on what that means for the covenant and his idea of the voluntary covenant and how the Holocaust was such a shattering event for the Jewish people that God can no longer command obedience to the original covenant and to Jewish law, but we have accepted that, re-accepted it, because we are still so in love with Judaism and Jewish life.
So what we're going to do, we have a reception in the lobby afterwards, and I know that Rabbi Goodman will be delighted to answer more questions. Rabbi Ellenson has one thing he wants to say, and then I just want to say something about books.
Oh, and I also have one message from Rabbi Greenberg for the community that he's given to us.
You want to wait 1 minute? Or?
I don't think it matters. And we'll flip a coin. Yeah, why don't you start? Okay.
Well, I do want to say my favorite page in the book is this picture of Daniel when he was 13 or 14 years old with Rabbi Sachs. I'm sure his mother has seen it, but I think that in many ways is the highlight. No, I shouldn't put it that way. Intellectually, it isn't. But it is a highlight of the book. He didn't have a beard then, I'll say that. And your hair wasn't really quite as long. I am not Daniel's parent or uncle, but I'm going to be avuncular for one moment. And I want to pick up on what Rabbi Katz said at the beginning. This community should really be quite proud that it educated and fostered a young man like this. Years ago, there was a responsum written by a rabbi named Tzvi Hirsch Kalischer, and I won't go into all the details, but Rabbi Kalischer was a Chad Memavasrei Tzion. He was really the founder of religious Zionism. And in this, he was asked about the status of children born of non-Jewish mothers, Jewish fathers, but in writing this responsum, this Jewish legal opinion, he said that every Jewish child was Zera Kodesh, was holy offspring, holy seed. And he said it was important to provide all of these children with education and to nurture them within the community. And the word he uses is, he says, because how do you know each child who stands before you, sits before you, mi yodea ulai gedolei Yisrael yutzmachu mehen. Who knows, one day great leaders, great scholars of the Jewish people may spring from this seed. And I just want to say, Daniel, as a 76-year-old white Jewish male, to know that there are people like you in this generation, to be a Chulia Chadasha, a new link in the Shalshelet HaKabbalah, the chain of Jewish tradition, fills me with, the word is either nachas or nachas. I'm not sure how I'd say it, but I take a great, great degree of pride in your work, and I know and predict that one day someone 50, 100 years from now is going to be writing about Rabbi Daniel Goodman and what he is going to contribute to Jewish thought. So I thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Ellenson, and thank you all for coming again. We started talking about, one of your first questions was how I came to write this book, and there's an answer that relates to how it developed out of my dissertation that I discussed, but the real answer, how I came to write this book, is I came to write this book because of being born and bred in this community. Because of the decision that my parents made to send me to Heritage Academy, which was the Jewish day school that used to be here up the street, to grow up here at Bethel and have my bar mitzvah here and be a part of the other shuls and Jewish institutions in the community. It was really growing up here and the Jewish education that I got from this whole community that led to this book. And book wouldn't be here without all of you, and that's not an exaggeration. That's the truth. So thank you all. And I have a message from Rabbi Yitz Greenberg for the community that we can conclude with. He wrote to me in advance of this book talk, and he said, this book launch is important and constructive. It is important not to let the needed fight against evil and death distract us from pursuing our agenda of increasing life and treating it as sacred. And if I could insert within his message, if there's one thing that you should take away from Rabbi Greenberg's teachings, it's the importance of the sanctity of life and viewing every single person as being in the image of God, which means every person is infinitely valuable, equal to one another, and all unique. Every single person, man or woman, black or white, Jewish or non-Jewish, it doesn't matter. Every single person is in the image of God, and if we really viewed every person as infinitely valuable in that manner, the world would be a much, much better place. So Rabbi Greenberg continued, writing and studying books of religious thought is an important part of pursuing a healthy communal life. All the more so since Soloveitchik and his children are particularly focused on holiness, which means making life precious. They are particularly focused on holiness in our actual, very real lives. And he added, I don't know, maybe he co-wrote this with you, he co-conspired this part with you, because he concluded here saying, Springfield should be proud of its native sons and daughters, such as Daniel, leading and contributing to national Jewish life. Hope that the book does well. Yitz.
Thank you. So just two concluding thoughts. As luck would have it, we ordered 25 copies of the book, and they'll be here tomorrow morning despite our best efforts. However, I'm going to have I'll be out there, and I will certainly, there are a couple books that are here that could be purchased, but if you leave me a check or a credit card number, I'm happy to take them for you and ensure that you get the books in the next week or so, because I very much, if you want a copy of Soloveitchik's Children and you don't want to order it on Amazon, I want to help make sure that you get it and that you do that Torah learning. The secondly is that what would a Jewish event be like without a little something to eat? So there is a reception in the lobby, and for those of you who are concerned, it is from Yossi's Catering, so it is the level of kashrut that I hope will make everybody feel comfortable and able to eat. Thank you all for being here, and thank you, Rabbi Ellenson and Rabbi Goodman.